Good evening, jury. Today I will be representing Eileen Warnos versus the state of Florida. Now, we all understand that murder is wrong, but where do we draw the line with self-defense? My client has been accused of murdering 7 men in cold blood, but to me, it was self-defense. For a further look into the reason why we believe that this is self-defense, let's take a look at her childhood. When my client was 4 years old, her and her brothers were abandoned by her parents to her grandparents, and her grandparents were very abusive and neglectful. Over the years, as she grew up, she was raped and molested by many family members, friends and family members within her home. And by the time she was 14, she was raped by a family member and ended up pregnant. The child that she gave birth to ended up being put up for adoption, but why did no one question why a 14-year-old gave birth? No one looked into the issue. No one thought to ask questions to figure out whether or not there was any ill intent going on within the home. La-di-da. After giving up the child for adoption, the molestation and the sexual abuse, it continued on throughout the rest of her life. She was abused sexually by men and boys within the neighborhood for the exchange of cigarettes, booze, and to her knowledge, this was affection to her. This was love. At the end of the day, she ended up beginning to sell sex to survive. She ran away from that abusive household that she was in, and she ended up selling sex to survive out in the wilderness. After years of abuse and rape and mistreatment, her coping strategies, of course, began to wear down. She began to sell sex for to live, the people that she was interacting with were also terrorizing her. And she began to develop these mental disorders, PTSD, alcohol, drug abuse, severe anxiety, depression, tip of the iceberg. During her trial, her history of mental health disorders was completely omitted. My client was often depicted as a person who enjoyed seducing the men that she encountered before she murdered and robbed them. The funds and the money and the jewelry or whatever she robbed off of these men, she would share this with her girlfriend at the time, Tyria Moore. Back to that traumatic childhood upbringing, her grandfather would molest and rape her during the time that she spent there, all the way up until she was 14 or 15 years old. Her grandfather would sexually abuse her. And her grandmother would do nothing about this, and her younger brother could not do anything about it. As he was younger than her, there was nothing he could really do. Her grandfather forced her at times to watch him drown animals. Over time, she told in interviews that she had sexual relations with her brother, Keith Warnos, who she named her son at the age of 14 when she had her son. She named her son Keith, but her grandfather forced her to give the child up for adoption, and she never saw him again. Once her grandmother passed when she was 15 years old, her grandfather actually put her out of the house, and she had nowhere to stay. She ended up living in the woods, in an abandoned car that was in the woods. And as time went on, I believe it was during the winter when this was going on, that's when she began to sell sex and sexual favors for things that she needed or wanted within the people in her community, and within, she began prostitution. Over time, the sexual trauma and everything from her family members and from her clients that she gained after she was put out. She began to develop mental disorders, borderline personality disorder, antisocial disorder, and PTSD from the sexual trauma, which borderline personality disorder and antisocial disorder are common mental disorders associated with serial killers. She dropped out of high school her freshman year, and her principal knew her living arrangements. He knew what she had going on, and no one raised any flags. She dropped out of school her freshman year, and no one raised any flags. She actually stated in an interview, quote, "What was strange was that the principal knew I wasn't living at home, but in the woods. Guess he admired me for having the guts to still go to school," end quote. After she dropped out of high school, I believe that was freshman year, she'd be 16. She was in Colorado, and she got into a car accident or some type of vehicular problem. The other person that was in the other car that she collided with ended up passing away. And there was a warrant issued for her arrest for a vehicular manslaughter. But instead of going to court, she hitchhiked to Florida, and now she has a warrant in Colorado. Once she got to Florida, she married a man, Louis Fell. He was 69 years old. She was 20. The marriage only lasted 9 weeks, and it ended up with him getting a restraining order against her. I believe that if my client was giving the help that she needed and required as a child and in her early adulthood, she would have had a different outcome in life. A person such as her, who went through that many traumatic experiences, not only with family, but also with friends, it prevented her from being able to make a rational thought. She presented the signs and symptoms of a person who was not mentally okay, and she was ignored not only by her family, but by her community. That people had knowledge of what was going on with her, and no one got her the help that she needed. She was abandoned, neglected, abused, and pushed to the side. You can't expect a person to operate outside their fight or flight mode when they've never been taught how to act outside of that reaction. Thank you.